Christian versus the Vine Girl. When she starts, he stomps down, and then ice comes spearing at her. And a giant ice pillar, which is as big as the stadium, comes and freezes her. He goes, sorry about that. But then somehow, he realizes that he can't. He goes, ah! Screaming in pain as he absorbs the ice back into him. He goes, ah! Some of the heroes close their mouths, put their hand over their mouth, saying that that's scary. It's like, that's creepy. Well, it's not creepy, it's weird, kind of. That's his quirk. He goes, ah! Until I find a new way to melt that ice. This is the only way I can get past it. Then he puts it back into his hand. But then he realizes something. Why the hell can't he use his ice in his other hand? He can only use it in his left hand, and he can stomp with both of his. He can only use it in one hand. Like, he can't use it in both of his hands if he wanted to. So, his next fight is with Ida. He goes, ah! And rushes at him. Ida would go and try and push him out. Christian would just freeze him from behind, putting him into an ice coffin. He goes, this is enough. Then he kicks the ice, which Ida kicks his stomach. He goes, speeding, and then flying out of the ring. Going, oh. Next is Christian's match with Todoroki. Christian says, here comes my... Then they both clash ices, both Christian winning. He goes, damn it! A couple of clashes later with ice, and Christian starts to use close range. He can use both ice fist. He can only use... So then he's using both his fists, except only his left fist is icy. Then he lands a punch on Shoto, which spins him up in the air, but then he lands with his ice. Going, he says, why don't you ever use your fire? He says, I don't know. Because I always reject that Sir's power. He says, it's not his power, it's yours. Use it. He says, no. Activating his fire. He says, now. I don't think I've never used this before, Shoto, so I'll show you this. He goes, his left side glows white, while his other side glows blue. He goes, Shoto says, what? I can only use one side. He goes, his left hand is full of fire, while his left hand is full of ice. Is covered in ice. He goes, well, his left side and right side are burning and freezing. He goes, no, Shoto, when on his left side, where his whole body was like frozen, that's my dude, and then just his arm on his other side is, he goes, and beats the crap out of him, boom, 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 and then they both use their fire. He goes, Christian goes, but then him and Todoroki go for their final clash, but then, when they go for their final clash, Christian disappears. He goes, where did it go? He says. What did Dabi say again? He says, your concern has you distracted, Shoto, and then blasts him with fire, going, da, da, na, 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 na. Shoto gets blasted back and gets destroyed as he releases the fire. He goes, you pros ought to lay off. I'm kidding. Okay, so he can use fire. He can use fire if he wants, and he can use ice if he wants. In both hands and both arms. And both legs. He can use ice in both hands and both legs. He can use fire in both hands and both legs. So I just want to make this much easier. So then it's his final match against Midoriya. I'm going to say somehow Bakugo was defeated by Kirishima because he thought of a different strategy to defeat Bakugo. Instead of just taking all Bakugos. Actually, no. Christian and Bakugo are in the semifinals. When it starts, Christian goes for a fire Kamehameha, going, ah! And shooting a giant fire beam. He goes, with one hand, going, boom! Humongous fire wave comes. But what Bakugo doesn't realize is when it hits him, it doesn't do that much. Then he says, "Ah, your fire's weak, Lutz." Ah! But then a giant wave of ice comes and collapses on Bakugo. He goes, well, hold on, that wouldn't make sense if Kirishima beat him. It's Christian versus Kirishima. Christian launches ice going, that's right, he doesn't have fire. I don't know what I'm thinking about. Look, he doesn't have fire, and he can melt his own ice somehow. He just puts her hand on it, and then it melts the ice. Even if it's super cold, he can still melt it. Christian would go, shooting his ice, going, and he has pure white hair. Kirishima would be hit by this, going, it's so much power. Then Christian disappears and creates an ice beam, freezing him. Then he says, sorry, I went overboard. He says, then he whispers to Kirishima while he's frozen solid. How are you already back?
The boat's down the street.
The boat's not down the street, though.
The boat's right there.
Ah, no it's not. Whatever. Alright, so back to this. His final match is with Midoriya. Christian says, Midoriya, you ready? He goes, yes. He says, 1 for 30. Christian instantly shoots ice. He goes, smash! It doesn't full on break the ice. Like when it hits it, his ice still goes through it. Christian says, he doesn't says, sorry Shoto, I never showed you this. He powers up an ice ball into his hand, but then it forms into a blade. He says, ice transformation. I can turn my ice into blades. I can manipulate it into different weapons. Then he throws the sword up in the air, and Deku looks at it. He creates 2 shuriken in his hand from ice and then throws it going boom boom. Deku dodges both of them, but does get cut by them a little bit. Christian appears behind him, saying, surprise! And Deku turns around, he's hit by an ice punch, sending him flying out of the ring. He goes, ah. But Deku, with his faster strength, would say, Delaware smash! And launch himself right back in. Christian says, smart. He says, how can you take this stuff? Ice beam! I'm trying to hit him, but he's easily dodging it, going, Christian says, perfect. He's running around the ring. Then a barrier forms around them. An ice barrier forms around them. He says, now there's nowhere to escape. Then he creates ice spikes to lure Deku into a corner. He says, Todoroki, because remember, Christian's last name is Todoroki. He says, Todoroki, are you there? Then the ice melts, but there's no one there. Christian goes from behind him saying, hi, boop, boop, and he punches him out of the ring. He goes, in your face. The League of Legends just watching this, saying that we need him. They're moving on to their provisional hero license. No. They're training one. Christian is actually training at Hawks Hero Agency. He says, "Hi, Mr. Hawks." He goes, "Hey, kiddo. Nice to see you again." He says, "Nice to see you too." He says, "How's Toya?" He goes, "You know he went missing years ago." He goes, "Wait, what?" He goes, "Oh yeah, he did. I'm sorry to ask you that." He goes, No. It's okay." It says, "I'm just here to choose that. I chose your pro hero agency." He goes, "That's nice." Because if some people don't remember, Hawks did open his own hero agency, and he trains there. Hawks tells him to show him some of his abilities. Christian takes a deep breath and goes, he says, "Maybe a wind blast," and moves out of the way. But then Christian goes, and frost breath comes and goes, boom. He says, "Whoa, frost breath." Then one of his wings freeze. He goes, "Whoa, that's pretty good." He says, "This is nothing." Hank says, "Ice beam!" Then shooting it out of the Hawks keeps on dodging, and then it freezes the walls around him. He says, "I shouldn't be doing this. I have to think I'm gonna freeze this place." He says, then they go to like a designated area where no one is. Then he tells him to use his full power move. Christian says, "Sub-Zero Slammer!" Then puts his hand to the ground. A giant ice pillar lifts Hawks up. It goes, "Mirror." Then Christian comes with an ice orb, hitting Hawks down. And then he's on the ground. Then Christian lifts himself up with an ice pillar. Then from his mouth going. Then a giant ice beam comes from his mouth, and he goes, "Ah!" Hawks comes from his hand, going boom, and he jets down, hitting Hawks. Hawks is completely unconscious. He goes, "Oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that. I was gonna say go to the Stain fight." Hawks comes in to join the fight. Christian's holding on to Hawks' foot, his leg, while he flies him there. Then Hawks drops down, going, With Christian, he says, "Christian, and you're here with Hawks?" He goes, "Yeah, I went to his pro hero agency." He says, "How old is he?" Christian says, "I think about 18. He says, "What's your age, Hawks?" He says, "Look, I don't know Hawks' actual age, so I'm gonna say he's about 20. He says, "No need, bruh. We gotta fight." Hawks would shoot his wings, and Christian would shoot ice. Christian, ice pillar behind him, behind Stain. What Stain doesn't realize is Hawk shot his things behind him, which landed on the ice wall, which Stain thought was just him missing. He says, "Guys, what do you mean? Why are you guys smiling? You didn't hit me." Christian smiles and says, "Exactly." He said, Hawks moves his fingers, and then the wings come flying back. The feathers come flying back, hitting him, Stain, going, He goes, "Ah." Then Christian, with one kick, knocks him straight out. Hawk says, "Wow, kid, you have one hell of a kick. That's strong. That could have almost knocked out All Might." He says, "Thank you, Mr. Hawks," and that's it for this part, because I need another recap.